What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, December 4th, 2017, getting into the start of a brand new week. And as has become all too common occurrence, as soon as my radio show starts, my web server, whatreallyhappened.com, comes under massive DOS attack, trying to keep people from finding out what's going on. In fact, this is very, very intense. The load average is at a record high. So we'll just let the children throw their tantrum, and we'll get into the radio show right now. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer your calls when you call on in. Let's see. Now, as you probably know, Donald Trump earlier today had a press conference from Salt Lake City, Utah, talking about pulling back, shrinking back on some of these declared national monuments, and in particular his intention to shrink the Bears Ears and the Grand Staircase Escalante national monuments spanning millions of acres in Utah. And these two national monuments are among 27 that Trump ordered Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke to review early this year. Now, the Grand Staircase Escalante was a big stink. That one was declared into existence by Bill Clinton, and it basically made off-limits the low-sulfur coal deposits located on that land, forcing companies that needed low-sulfur coal to buy it from Asia from Bill Clinton's cronies over there. It also violated Utah's statehood agreement because that coal was pledged to support Utah's educational system. And without that coal, Utah had to accept federal funding for their schools and along with it federal control. So I'm glad that Trump is pulling back on that. Whether the reduction in the Grand Staircase Escalante is going to include the coal reserves or not remains to be seen. Now, apparently last Friday, and it's a pattern for the government to drop bad news or scandal news on a Friday. Everybody's into weekend mode, and by Monday it's old news. But apparently the FBI dropped more Hillary records on Friday, confirming that Uranium One was indeed part of the investigation. And so a lot of email preservation and production requests are going on out to the CFIUS members who are involved in that decision-making process to sell that uranium to Russia. Now, according to another story that came on out, this one from Investment Watch blog, the Department of Justice has been investigating the FBI for the last 11 months. Ever since Trump won the election, the Department of Justice is investigating the FBI apparently for obstruction in the way they handled several investigations regarding the Clintons, including the Uranium One scandal, Hillary's email server, the Clinton Foundation, and so it may be that we're going to start seeing some obstruction charges coming forward. And I think probably most people were completely unaware there even was an investigation here. So anyway, getting on back to the problems that Michael Flynn is in. Yes, he did lie under oath to the FBI, and that's a problem. But the reality is, if you get into what they actually talked about, when he was talking to the Russian ambassador, there were two issues. One was Trump's message to Russia not to overreact to the sanctions that had been thrown on them by the Obama administration, and two, seeking Russia's support to derail the UN resolution regarding Israel's activities in Palestine. So once again, Israel's in the muck there. None of these were inappropriate. Trump had won the election, it was in the transition period, and it is perfectly normal for presidents and their staff to make contacts with foreign governments and start establishing lines of communication with which to conduct business. So again, it's a big nothing burger. And it underscores the fact that after almost a year of investigation and all that money that's been spent, Robert Mueller has not been able to find anything substantive about Russian-Trump collusion during the campaign. Even Alan Dershowitz is out there saying the arrest of Flynn shows how weak Mueller's case against Trump really is. There's nothing there. And still they're ignoring the evidence of Russian collusion in the Uranium One deal. So we're seeing Russiagate start to mutate to Israelgate, because Flynn's unsuccessful efforts on behalf of the Israelis were the fruit of an Israeli appeal to the incoming Trump administration. And supposedly, the Obama State Department signed off on the Trump administration having contacts with the Russian government, being in the transition. And apparently, Kushner was the one who directed Flynn to make this contact and present this idea about Russia vetoing this UN resolution regarding Israel's crimes against the Palestinians. So all of a sudden this has turned away from Russian collusion to Israel meddling once again. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And a lot of people have picked up on this story over at mondoweiss.net. They have a story about how Flynn's plea on Russia influence reveals Israel's influence. The one who was wielding this influence out of school, so to speak, was Israel, not Russia. Another story coming out of Information Clearinghouse, the curious case of Jared Kushner and the Israel lobby. And they're making the point that Kushner crossed the line from using his First Amendment right to speak freely about government policy into trying to subvert official U.S. policy in favor of Israel. So there's the real meat. That's what Robert Mueller has found. It's not what he wanted to find. He's trying to find something and can take Trump down with, and he's coming up short. Now, apparently, the Mueller investigation has been hit with their own scandal, because apparently one of the FBI agents working for Mueller, Peter Strzok, was outed for some very pro-Hillary Clinton, anti-Trump tweets that he was making, revealing that he's not unbiased and objective. He was the deputy head of counterintelligence at the FBI, and he was a key player in the Hillary investigation. So this guy was biased going on in, and Mueller has now reassigned him, and Congress is now demanding hearings, and it looks like that's going to happen. So let's look at this idea about foreign interference in American elections. They're trying to make a big deal about this, and the reality is that nobody can prove Russian interference in our election. Everybody is sternly ignoring Israel's constant interference in our internal politics. But as it turns on out, there was a study that was done showing that foreign lobbyists contributed more than $4.5 million to candidates in the 2016 elections. And the way they do that is they'll hire U.S. citizens to act as their representatives in the U.S. They will transfer the funds to them. Then the U.S. citizen will transfer it to the candidates in question. And it's a way of getting around bans on direct foreign donations. And Bill Clinton used exactly the same thing back in 1994 during the Chinagate scandal. And it is a loophole that should be closed. But Russia seems to be the least of the players, certainly behind Israel and behind all these other countries. Now, remember former Democratic Congresswoman Corrine Brown? She had her day in court. She has been sentenced to 5 years in prison. And she was convicted in this federal fraud case on May 18th. And there was a long wait, and there was a sentencing hearing. She pled for mercy. But basically, she was convicted on 18 counts, including wire fraud, tax evasion, and other crimes stemming from her theft from a Virginia-based charitable foundation. She was found guilty on 7 counts of wire fraud, 5 counts of mail fraud, 1 count of scheming to conceal material facts, 3 tax fraud charges, 1 count of obstructing IRS laws. And basically what it is Brown used a charity to enrich herself. Boy, where have we heard that one before? I seem to recall one of the candidates in last year's election has a charity that doesn't actually do a lot of charitable work and has never had an audit. And I think maybe maybe it's time for that to actually happen. Now, over at ABC, everybody's turned on Brian Ross over that major mistake that he made, or this lie, which it may well have been, where he was reporting on Michael Flynn's guilty plea in lying to the FBI, and reported that the contacts with the Russian ambassador had taken place during the Trump campaign. And everybody lit up on that and said, oh, that's it. We've got Trump now. We've got him in a headlock. And, of course, it triggered like a 300-point drop on the Dow. And it turned out Ross was inaccurate. All of the contacts that have been documented took place during the transition, which is when such contacts are supposed to happen. Michael Flynn didn't do anything wrong. Trump did nothing wrong. Brian Ross certainly did. But in they're piling on to him. He's been suspended for 4 weeks without pay. And back in October 2001, Ross had another one of his notorious false news stories when he reported that an anthrax-laced letter sent to then Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle's office contained traces of bentonite. Ross went on to report that, as far as is known, only one country, Iraq, has used bentonite to produce biological weapons. That turned out to be a complete lie and a fiction. And remember, the actual anthrax used in those letters was determined to have come from a U.S. government biological warfare laboratory. Now, getting on over to the obsession we are now having with sexual assault charges. Article out of shtfplan.com. Apparently, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office is deliberately dragging their feet into its investigation into rape allegations against disgraced liberal Hollywood figure Harvey Weinstein. And the lawyer for the plaintiff is noting the city's district attorney already has a history of refusing to file charges against powerful sexual predators. And apparently Weinstein's organization made a contribution to the district attorney's campaign. So given enough time, the corruption just spreads to every corner of our universe. Now, Donald Trump has quit waffling. He's hopped off the fence, and he's now given Roy Moore his full endorsement. And at this point, it's pretty much obvious that all of the sexual allegations brought forward in this case were, in fact, an orchestrated smear job. The stories have all fallen apart on examination. Other people have come forward to say, no, it didn't happen. In one case, one of the accusers has a long history of mental illness, drug abuse, and lying. So hopefully Roy Moore is going to win, because the Democrats are desperate to win the Senate, and they're within a couple of seats now. If Roy Moore loses to his opponent, that's going to be one more Democratic seat. And I think that's one of the reasons they're trying so hard. Meanwhile, apparently an organization partnered with George Soros finance groups and led by a radical leftist who's the half-brother of the infamous, controversial Reverend Al Sharpton, have been diligent working over the last few weeks to register convicted felons across Alabama so that they will go out and vote against Roy Moore. And basically, the man spearheading the campaign has stated outright that the effort is meant to ensure a Democratic victory in Alabama. And the thousands of felons reported newly registered over the past few weeks were most likely not included in any recent polling on the Alabama Senate race put out by major firms. Well, we need to take a very, very close look at this, because in Alabama, people convicted of a felony lose their right to vote. The same is true in pretty much every other state in the Union. Now, some people convicted of a felony may apply to have their vote restored upon completion of their full sentence. Those convicted of certain felony offenses such as murder, rape, incest, sexual crimes against children, and treason are not eligible for reenfranchisement. So somebody better be taking a good look at those registrations, because the process to have your vote restored, it's a long amount of paperwork. It doesn't happen overnight. So it looks like the Democrats are still up to their vote rigging games yet again. Meanwhile, Maxine Waters is out there flapping her gums saying, we're going to find that Trump needs to be impeached. And again, nothing but fantasies in their concerns against Trump. They're just still angry that they weren't able to steal the White House for Hillary Clinton. And Dianne Feinstein is out there, and the same thing about her concern about Trump's ability to do his job rises by the day. Now, Trump needs to stop playing nice guy, needs to stop the rope-a-dope. He's got to put on those presidential brass knuckles, because the entire Democratic political machine, and sadly a lot of Republicans, are out for him. They want him out of that White House. He can't be counted on to do what they want him to do. Now, as you know, the Congress, the Senate specifically, passed the GOP tax plan late Friday, and everybody's out there already trying to figure out what it's going to mean, because apparently at the last second there were a whole bunch of modifications and additions. In fact, one of the senators complained that when he was handed that final document, there were a bunch of handwritten pages in there that were simply illegible. Now, why they would vote on something they can't understand begs explanation, but they did. But then Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley decided to have a case of foot-and-mouth disease, and apparently in an interview with the Des Moines Register, he basically said the Congress wasn't interested in tax cut for working people because they just waste the money on booze or women. You know, that the rich people are investing and the rich people are good for the economy, and those working class people, you know, the more money you let them have, the more they'll just fritter it away. So we weren't concerned about tax cuts for them. It's all about the donor class. That's what Congress is looking at, the people who sign them their checks to loot the country for the benefit of the money junkies. Now, getting on over into the war zones, apparently the British government has suspended a foreign aid project after a BBC Panorama investigation found taxpayers' cash was being diverted to extremists in Syria. And officers from a British-backed police force in Syria have also been working with the courts carrying out these brutal sentences. And a UK government spokesman said that it takes allegations of cooperation with terrorist groups extremely serious. Well, that's what our government was saying until it came on out that our government was, in fact, supporting the extremists, ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Now, a lot of people are very concerned that having lost in Syria, losing in Afghanistan, and not wanting to lose the momentum of the war machine, that they're going to get another war going just as quickly as they can. They're not really all that close to get war with Iran going, although Israel's pushing as hard as they can. North Korea is still a standoff and may not happen because North Korea now has a nuclear deterrent. So that what's now left on the menu? Lebanon. They're going to go into Lebanon. And already Israel is out there overflying their territory and firing on Syria from inside Lebanon. That's a violation of their airspace. But according to this article that we put up at whatreallyhappened.com, you know, they're asking, why is Washington staying in Syria when ISIS is supposedly gone? Will there be another attempt to overthrow Bashar al-Assad in the near future? Yes. And meanwhile, the growing rancor between Israel and Hezbollah will probably lead to a war there as well. Here a war, there a war, everywhere a war. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha America, welcome back to our show. Get out your paper and pencil here, because if you'd like to be a supporter to Republic Broadcasting, the address to send a check, money order, box tops, what have you, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, and that's in Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number, if you want to call in with a credit or debit card, is 800-724-2719, extension 03. And we really do need your help. RBN needs your help. WhatReallyHappened.com needs your help. Things are very, very tight. We're dealing with failing hardware, rising prices for various services on the net, and we may have to be in a position of having to pay for a faster channel on the new deregulated, non-neutral Internet. All right, getting on back to the war zones here. The Israelis carried out an attack near Damascus. They're claiming they killed 12 Iranians. And this is a very touchy situation because Netanyahu's been claiming that Iran has built military bases all over Syria, even though his Minister of Defense, Avigdor Lieberman, is saying, no, they've just got some trainers there is all. So on Friday, Israel attacked this site south of Damascus, and the strike was reported early in the Israeli press, but subsequently the reports were removed from all the media outlets. And it appears that there may have been another case of fake news, and the blame for this one goes to the BBC, because the base that was attacked by Israel, and they flew over Lebanon to fire missiles into Syria so that Syria would not dare shoot back. But the base they hit appears to be the same one featured in a November BBC report, which showed satellite images detailing the purported construction and renovation of a, quote, Iranian military base, end quote, near El Kiswa, which is 8 miles south of Damascus. Now, the BBC report was dubiously sourced to a Western intelligence source, and of course Israel used it to ratchet up the Iran is in Syria, but the BBC report itself was very vague and hesitant. They didn't say it was confirmed. They were very ambiguous, saying the satellite images seemed to show construction activity at the site. Well, yeah, but the satellite doesn't show who's doing the building. And basically there was a series of 24 large low-rise buildings which could be used for housing soldiers and vehicles. And they just went with this idea that this was Iran, and they had a complete lack of evidence for such a claim. And so BBC makes a claim that some new military construction is owned by Iran in Syria, and Israel goes ahead and bombs it. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Ron in Missouri, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. You're on the air.
Okay. I was wondering if you might know of any website that might give a detailed outlay of what countries we are involved in armed conflict or so-called advisors.
I don't know one, but that would be a really good idea to find. I think probably that sort of thing right now, certainly within the government, is being discouraged because most Americans don't know how many countries the U.S. is messing around with right now. When that ambush in Niger took place, it came as a shock to most people. In fact, I would say probably none of us really know just how many countries the U.S. is messing around with. Certainly, they're into a lot of the African nations now.
So with no idea where to turn, huh?
You know something? That's something I'll research after the show today.
That'd be great, Mike. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Now then, over in Yemen, there's been quite a bit of turmoil over the last few days, and apparently former President Ali Abdullah Saleh has been killed fighting with his former allies. Now, up until this week, Mr. Saleh had been fighting alongside the Houthis in a war against Yemen's current president, Hadi. And Saleh, you need to remember, was the Yemeni president who was removed in the last so-called successful U.S. intervention back in 2012. And only yesterday we were getting these reports saying that Saleh was back, he was going to resume the presidency, and the Saudis had basically quit. They were going to give up. But now there's been this assassination, and Saudi Arabia has uncorked a massive air attack on Yemen's capital city. So it's escalating, and again, it's another horrific war in a world at war. And it does seem like it's time for us to just start saying, yeah, we're a world at war. All initiated by the U.S. government or the U.S. government's partners and proxies. But there are bloody battles waged on the streets of Yemen's capital as alliances appear to be shifting dramatically. And as if they didn't have enough problems along with the cholera, now there's a diphtheria outbreak racing across Yemen. So we're going to take a break for some commercials. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. Now, Hamas is threatening a new intifada over reported plans that the U.S. will move their embassy to Jerusalem, which is tantamount to recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Now, the capital of Israel currently is Tel Aviv, but Israel has for many years, many decades, coveted the entire city of Jerusalem, even though under the original United Nations partition plan, there's a Jewish quarter and an Orthodox quarter and a Muslim quarter and a Christian quarter. And lately, of course, Israel has been trying to encircle the city, going into East Jerusalem and displacing the Palestinians who live there. And certainly Netanyahu's been lobbying for the U.S. to acknowledge Jerusalem as the capital of Israel to solidify their position. So Hamas is up there. They're very upset about it. They're not the only ones. Even the Arab League is saying this is a bad idea. This will definitely fan up tensions in the region. Jordan and Egypt have also warned the United States against recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And he was supposed to make an announcement today. So far it has not happened. What we're hearing, though, from Kushner is that Trump is still looking at a lot of facts. And so it looks like Trump is having a second thought about this, because it would basically inflame tensions in the area. It would certainly turn more of those Arab nations against the United States. Meanwhile, Jared Kushner over at the Saban Forum is saying what Israel really needs to do is they need to come to a peace deal with the Palestinians, because there's a risk Palestine might form an alliance with the other Arab states. And this is really the crux of the problem. Ever since Israel was created by carving off part of Palestine, Israel was out there saying, we demand you recognize our right to exist, but we don't recognize Palestine's right to exist. In fact, for the longest time, Israel's official position was there never really was a Palestine. It was just made up by the anti-Semites to plague the new nation of Israel. Golda Meir called Palestine a land without a people for a people without a land, which is nonsense, because there was a thriving culture in that region of the world going all the way back to biblical times. And we put together a page on our website that shows all these maps from the Renaissance, the Middle Ages, all the way back to some of the earliest navigation charts in the area, and they all indicate the presence of a Palestine. So Kushner's idea is that if Israel doesn't tone down, if they don't come to a peace agreement with Palestine, if they keep on going with this double standard of you have to recognize our right to exist, but we won't recognize your right to exist, it is going to blow up the region. And that's all that Israel would have to do to calm everything down, is simply give to Palestine that which it demands for itself, recognition of a right to exist. And all the turmoil and bloodshed and war and horror that we have seen since the foundation of Israel just comes from this one little hypocrisy. The other Arab nations in the region have made it very clear. They'll recognize Israel's right to exist once Israel recognizes Palestine's right to exist. And it sounds like a reasonable course of action, but not in the eyes of the government of Israel. Meanwhile, Netanyahu, possibly to divert more attention from his corruption problems, is on the warpath against Iran. And apparently he's gone on another fiery tirade against Iran, comparing Iran with Hitler's Germany, saying that they both shared the goal to exterminate all Jews. And by the way, Israel's been saying that about Iran for 30 years, along with the claim that they're merely weeks away from having a nuclear weapon. And so Netanyahu is ratcheting up his rhetoric, saying that Iran, you know, they're the new Nazis, they want to kill all the Jews. There's only one small problem with all of that, and that is the fact that there is a large population of Jews that live in Iran. They're quite comfortable there. Some of them are even in the government. One of the world's oldest continually operating synagogues is in Iran. Now, some years ago, Israel made an offer to the Iranian Jews to emigrate to Israel for a financial inducement. And the Iranian Jews said, no, all of our friends are here, our families here, our businesses are here. We'd be silly to leave. Now, obviously, if Iran was really the new Nazi horror and they wanted to kill Jews, they would be starting with the ones within their own border. But they're treated very well. They have full equality, freedom of religion. They don't want to leave there. Meanwhile, ramping up that rhetoric, Pompeo has now sent a letter to Iran warning against attacking U.S. and allied forces, which I don't think Iran is going to do unless those forces are attacking Iran. And then, of course, all bets are off. Now, Israel, along with that law that they just passed to protect Bibi Netanyahu from prosecution for his corruption, they've passed a new one, or they're discussing a draft bill, and it probably will pass, that will allow Israel's army to sue anyone who offends its soldiers by revealing army violations against the Palestinians. And this basically is that when the IDF commits these atrocities against the Palestinians, which they do, anybody who gets it on video and puts it on out there can be sued by those soldiers for defamation. And defamation is a word that Israel and its supporters love. There's the Anti-Defamation League, and the thinking is it doesn't matter if we're doing bad things, you just are not allowed to talk about them. That's what this law means. Now, getting on over into Korea. Actually, before we do that, let's take some phone calls here. We've got John in Phoenix. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, I'm going to switch topic a little bit. I just got a question, a real question. I'll listen to your response, and then you can let me get to the next caller. I've been wondering for a while, why is the words like jurisdiction and citizen enumeration sometimes spelled with uppercase J and sometimes with uppercase letters and sometimes lowercase letters? I can never figure that out.
Well, I think if you look at the Constitution's original written documents, you will notice that there are occasionally spelling and punctuation and grammar errors. In particular, the Second Amendment, there's an extra comma in there that doesn't need to be there, but this was in the days before word processors and automatic spelling check, and so I think that may be a simple explanation.
I mean, it just seemed bizarre to me because it's just those three words, and it's just those three words that they do it with. And I don't know, or I think it's just those three words they do it with. So that's all I wanted to know. You have a good day. Thanks for your time.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Steve in Florida. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, you know, his last caller, I hadn't planned on adding this, but I would have him hang on and wait for John Stadmiller's show and ask Ron McDonald that question. I'm willing to bet there's some significance behind that, but I'm not sure. But I would say throw it by Ron McDonald. But I called on, basically, I just looked at a web search here, and I found a website called visualcapitalist.com. And I'm looking at an article right now that says U.S. military personnel deployments by country, and this has been dated as of March 18, 2017. And it basically says nearly 200,000 troops are currently deployed overseas in 177 countries, and it does a breakdown on every country, how much percentage.
Yeah, the U.S. is garrisoning its empire the way ancient Rome did.
So I thought for that one caller that called in, it's called visualcapitalist.com, and it will show you U.S. military personnel deployments by country. Nice breakdown.
Well, it's a good breakdown, and thank you for the reference. However, there are some countries where our forces are stationed that we're not technically in a state of hostility with. So I don't know
Right.
how accurate that is in terms of determining where the U.S. is actually engaged in actual military operation. But I will take a look at the website, and it might be a good source.
Yeah. Hey, last comment is I'm rather surprised too that how Netanyahu is able to have the legislation enact a bill basically to protect him. I am blown away by that, and I think the Israelis are very angry about that also too. Plenty of them were in the streets protesting this action. So it doesn't sound like he has the support he thinks he has.
No, he doesn't, but with the elections being very suspect in Israel, he doesn't need the popular support. Yeah, the reason the bill went through the Knesset is that it extends to all top Israeli officials, including the members of the Knesset. While they're holding their office, they cannot be prosecuted for any corruption they may be engaged in. It's basically a license to be corrupt.
Yep, it is exactly that. Hey, thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here and scroll that down here. Now then, getting on over to Korea. Apparently, White House National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster is saying potential for war with North Korea increasing every day. Well, yes, we know the U.S. government is pushing for another war, for several more wars. There's a long-range plan that basically involves conquering the entire planet and dragging them back under the Bretton Woods Agreement, where they have to use our Federal Reserve notes for cross-border trade and banking, or for trade in natural resources, off of which the U.S. economy would make a huge profit. So they're out there doing this war talk about North Korea, and McMaster is now saying that they're going to call on China to impose greater economic sanctions against Pyongyang. And McMaster noted that Beijing's tremendous coercive power over North Korea. Well, there's a couple of things wrong with that. And the first thing wrong with that is the U.S. challenging China's ownership of the islands in the South China Sea. When the Cairo Convention, signed at the end of World War II, returned those islands to China after they'd been seized by Japan, and the U.S. signed that convention. The second problem is that North Korea refused to see the Chinese ambassador, who was going on down there to try and calm things down a little bit. So the potential for war is very, very great. And again, Kim Jong-un is not going to attack anybody with his nuclear missiles without a good reason. He is gambling that he can get these nuclear missiles working soon enough to discourage a U.S. invasion. And North Korea has stated that openly. That's the only reason they're spending all the money on the nuclear weapons and the missiles. That's the only way to guarantee peace in their country. It's the only way to guarantee they will not be invaded by the United States. Because the United States, look over the last 16 years, the United States acts really butch, attacking countries that can't strike back. But the U.S. seems to be okay with many countries that have nuclear weapons who don't like us, like Pakistan. But we're not making moves to invade Pakistan because Pakistan has got nuclear missiles. Now, meanwhile, Russia is starting to make moves to do a power broker deal with North Korea. North Korea is not listening to China anymore, so basically the Speaker of Russia's upper house, Valentina Matvinenko, is going to North Korea after the first of the year. And she's actually a very high official in Russia. She's third in the pecking order in the Russian government behind President Putin and Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev. So that would be a significant political coup if they're able to pull that off here. Meanwhile, of course, the United States is rattling their sabers as hard as they can just outside North Korea's borders, and they're practicing how they would do strikes on North Korea's nuclear sites. And this is the biggest ever joint air drill with South Korea, involving 230 aircraft. And it's including some of the military's most sophisticated and powerful aircraft, such as the B-1B Lancer bombers, stealth F-35 Lightnings, and F-22 Raptors. So you can see who the aggressor is here. Now, the deployment of the U.S. F-22 Raptors to South Korea has prompted a reaction from North Korea, basically saying that they do treat this as a provocation and that Trump and South Korea are literally begging for a war with North Korea, which does seem that way to me as well. But again, we don't really know how effective those F-22s are going to be. They certainly don't have the list of problems that the F-35 does. And I seem to recall an episode a few months ago where the U.S. was flying these Raptors along the border between North and South Korea. And the Chinese called up and said, just so you know, we can see those planes on our radar. Because one of the aspects of stealth is that a stealth design is usually designed to deal with a narrow band of radar frequencies, usually the higher frequencies. But old-fashioned lower frequency radars can pick these things up. Now, Senator Graham has come on out and said it's time for the Pentagon to move all U.S. military families out of South Korea ahead of the possible war. So they're definitely moving on. I would not be surprised to see it happen before the end of the year, before the end of the month. Now, as you know, down in Argentina, they've had that tragedy with their submarine, and Russia has provided a remote-controlled underwater vehicle called the Panther Plus. And if you've seen the movie Titanic or a bunch of other oceanographic shows, you know that the Russians really do have a tremendous capability in deep underwater archaeology and research. And they've started to dive on targets. The first one they found turned out not to be a part of the submarine. But they're operating at depths of 700, 800, and 900 meters. At this point, though, it sounds like there was a fire, an implosion, and the crew are all dead. So, like I've said before, I have a lot of respect for anybody who serves in a submarine, and you would never get me on one of those in a real combat situation. I've been down on the tourist submarines out here in Waikiki, and they're very, very cool. Now, over in Honduras, there are violent protests sweeping the country over alleged election fraud. Because, and even though authorities agreed to a partial recount, the population is convinced that opposition candidate Salvador Nasrallah actually won the election. But at the last second, late at night, the current president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, had a sudden come-from-behind victory, and nobody trusts it. Here's the irony. Apparently 50 U.S. rights groups have joined the call to urge the U.S. to press Honduras for electoral transparency. This in the country that had a crooked election last year that nobody still wants to talk about. So we're going to take a short break here for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And it looks like the problems with the F-22 Raptors in South Korea have already started. It's being reported on Sputnik News that one of the F-22s suffered an embarrassing performance failure. It was able to get back to the airfield, but once it was on the ground, it had to be towed off the runway. So they obviously lost engine issues there. Okay, let's take a few phone calls. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I just wanted to flesh out a little bit what you were talking about earlier with the Iranian Jews and so on. Back in the late 70s, the United States, Israel, in order to keep ahead of the demographic boom of the Palestinians, tried and did indeed get the United States to airlift thousands of what's called falafel Jews from Ethiopia and Eritrea into Israel. They offered them, of course, free immigration, and of course, Ethiopia and Eritrea in the 70s were in a horrible famine and so on. Since then, by the way, they have been discovered, the Israeli government has been discriminated against them big time, trying to now deport them, some of them being used unwittingly without giving their approval in medical sterilization projects and all that. one of the things that maybe you've also, I don't know if you went into or not, but when they talked about trying to lure the Iranian Jews into immigrating to Israel, it was done with the lure of checks, obviously coming from the United States, to lure them into doing it, and they still wouldn't immigrate.
Yes.
So there's that. But have you covered the Jared Kushner or Michael Flynn thing?
We did a little earlier in the show. We may not have caught all of the aspects. Have you got something we missed?
Well, I missed it, Mike, but it's now been found that the reason it wasn't Russia trying to influence the United States. It was the United States trying to influence, on behalf of Kushner, by the way,
yes.
who's a Zionist, and gave money to the really rabid, horrible settlers and so on, illegally. But at any rate, and didn't disclose that he was giving that money. But at any rate, Kushner prodded Flynn into contacting the Russians in order to get their approval or get their acquiescence into killing a UN resolution against Israel.
Yeah, we did cover that. We did cover that.
Yeah. So at the end, it wasn't us trying to influence Russia or Russia trying to influence us. It was us influencing Russia on behalf of the people who really control us, and that's the Israelis.
Yes, absolutely. Well, there was another item on the agenda when Mike Flynn talked to the ambassador, and that was a message from Trump to not overreact to the latest sanctions against the Russian economy, to give Trump a chance to sort of get in and get things toned down, which unfortunately, sadly, has not happened. Anyway, Peter, we're going to have to take another break here for station identification. Thank you very much for the phone call. And we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're going to go back to the phones here and talk to Terry in Oregon. Aloha, Terry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike, Peter's my favorite caller, and I think he's like me, retired military. But I just want to make the point that Israel's never going to recognize the Palestinians as a legitimate country because they're committed to this Greater Israel project that consumes Syria, parts of Iraq, parts of Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, and Jordan. So, that should be well known. And, we're tired of this stuff, that Israel's negotiating with people because they're never going to do it, and they're never going to give back land. They're never going to give back the West Bank. They're never going to give back Golan Heights. And they're never going to release Gaza, for something else. So I just want to make that point and get your reaction. Thanks.
No, you're absolutely right. Israel's idea of Middle East peace is they're going to grab a piece here and another piece over there and another piece over there. And we know that Israel's ultimate agenda is to have a land, Israel as it's described in the Bible, the land between the Euphrates and the Nile. In fact, if you look at the flag of Israel, that's what the two stripes at top and bottom represent, the two rivers. And so Israel basically using that religious definition of Israel as their justification, it's grabbing other people's land left and right. Israel was created on stolen land, stolen from the Palestinians. You're right. They're not interested in talking peace, and they have a bad habit of never negotiating in good faith even when they're forced to the talks, because they play a game called, one more thing. And that is, everybody will sit down and they'll reach an agreement, and then Israel will say, one more thing, we want to add this on. And the other side will say, all right, one more thing. And Israel will say, by the way, we've got one more thing. And they just keep on doing that until the other side realizes Israel is simply not bargaining in good faith. They're just trying to run out the clock. And so the other side will leave, and Israel can say, they left. We were talking peace. They left. I don't know what's wrong with them. And it is a tactic that they use. And right now, the only thing that Israel seems concerned with is the reaction of the world, in particular as it manifests as a desire not to purchase Israeli products, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And probably not too surprisingly, Israeli tourism has suffered because of this.
Right, and I just want to get your reaction to this. You know, it's been coming to my attention that the CIA is heavily influenced by the Zionists, and they're really infiltrated pretty good by the Zionists, and you know that was part of the Kennedy assassination thing too. What's your reaction to that?
Well, there were a lot of players in the John F. Kennedy assassination, and Israel's interest was that John F. Kennedy was adamant that Israel not be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons because of the destabilizing influence it would have in the Middle East. And Lyndon Johnson, who was very pro-Israel, was willing to look the other way as Israel began to steal weapons-grade uranium from inside the United States of America and smuggle most of it back to Israel for their first-generation fission bombs.
Yeah, Johnson was for anybody. It was for him for political reasons. You know, he's the one that called the airplanes back from, you know, when they bombed the USS Liberty.
Yeah, the Liberty.
Yeah, right. And everything he's done is just totally political for him.
Well, just as a reminder, on Wednesday of this week, in our third hour, we're going to have Dave Gahary about his USS Liberty book. And Phil Turney's also going to be joining us. They just took out a huge ad in the New York Times book section, and maybe that'll help get the word out. But yes, this is the way historically Israel has always treated with other nations. They never treat them as equals. They look down on the rest of the world as being automatically inferior. And it's actually in their religion that it's okay to cheat other people. The Ten Commandments only apply to Jews. And I remember when my first wife told me that, I thought she was pulling my leg. I really thought she was trying to pull a joke on me. Nope, she was absolutely convinced. The Ten Commandments are only regarding your fellow Jews, and everybody else is fair game.
Right. You say that's Wednesday?
Yes.
Okay, there's a lot of books have been written already about the Liberty, and some were written by the crew members aboard the ship, and some of those guys that wrote the book were Jewish themselves.
Yes. Well,
okay, Mike, thanks. I just made the point.
Okay, from their point of view, this wasn't a Jewish issue. This was a United States warship being fired on by the government of Israel. And it was intended, had the Liberty sunk, Egypt was going to be framed for it, to bring the United States into the war on Israel's side. And in fact, there was a nuclear-armed strike in the air on the way to Cairo when it started getting on out that it was actually Israel that was trying to sink that ship. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. The phone lines are now open. Now, last week we were talking about this huge scandal that has hit the United States Navy called the Fat Leonard scandal. And it's named after this gentleman. He's known as Fat Leonard Francis. He weighs 350 pounds. He's the former CEO of Glenn Defense Marine Asia. And he basically ran a scheme which involved scores of U.S. Navy officials and millions of dollars in bribes and improper gifts. And so far, along with hundreds of lower-level officers, it has hit 60. That's 60 U.S. Navy admirals in the Pacific Fleet. Now, they've started trials, and a U.S. Navy commander has been sentenced to 18 months in prison for his part in a fraud and bribery scheme, which cost the U.S. government, meaning you, the taxpayers, a total of $35 million. Now, this does not make our military seem very capable, along with the problems with the F-22 and the F-35. We know there are huge morale problems on these Navy ships. We know the crews are being overworked because they're dealing with a manpower shortage. In fact, fatigue and poor training may have been the reasons for these collisions that we saw between ships like the USS John S. McCain and these cargo ships, which they originally tried to say, oh, they were attacking us. They took these very expensive cargo ships and they just forced us to ram into them amidships here. Now, over in Great Britain, a warning is being sounded over the sharp rise in child and pensioner poverty. And this new study is saying that almost 400,000 more British children and 300,000 more pensioners were plunged into poverty in the past 4 years. But there's always plenty of money for the migrants, right? Lots and lots of money for the refugees and the migrants. But for your own people, well, you must make do with less so that we can have more. You must make do with less so that we can have more. It's the mantra of the money junkies. Now, Russia is getting ready to sell Chinese yuan bonds. It's another symptom that the U.S. dollar is in decline. The American empire is in decline. The parallels between the United States and ancient Rome are very obvious. Out of control debt, too much cost of war, amazing corruption. Same thing with the Soviet Union. Corruption, too much debt, too much spending on the military is what brought the Soviet Union down. Now, Venezuela is getting ready to introduce an oil-backed cryptocurrency. This is going to be a cryptocurrency based on Venezuela's undeveloped oil assets. And they're calling it the Petro. And it's backed by their oil reserves to try and shore up the collapsed economy. And it might work if it's given a chance. But remember, everybody who starts coming on out with a currency other than the U.S. dollar or tries to use a currency other than the U.S. dollar gets into trouble. In 2002, Saddam Hussein got permission from the United Nations to sell Iraq's oil for the euro. 1 year later, screaming weapons of mass destruction, the U.S. went on in, killed Saddam Hussein, and Iraq's oil is back on the world market, but only for the U.S. dollar. Then you had Muammar Gaddafi, who tore down the private central bank in Libya, set up a state central bank. Then he introduced a value-based currency, the gold dinar, which was instantly attractive to all the other African nations. And then Gaddafi announced that Libya's oil would be for sale only for the gold dinar. So go on in, stage what looks like a popular uprising, kill Gaddafi, reimpose a private central bank on the people of Libya. Nobody knows where the gold for the gold dinar actually went. That's the pattern. And so Maduro may have just guaranteed his coming demise by daring to come up with a currency other than the U.S. dollar. Now, do you remember journalist Daphne Caruana Galicia? This was the journalist who exposed the Panama Papers corruption scandal, which has been tremendously embarrassing to a lot of the world's elite who were using this law outfit in Panama to hide their wealth and duck their taxes. And Daphne was killed when her car was blown up in what was obviously a targeted assassination. And apparently 10 people have now been arrested for that assassination. All of those arrested are Maltese nationals, and most have a criminal record. Those money junkies, they play for keeps over there. Getting on over into Germany, their Christian Social Union, which is the Bavarian sister party of Chancellor Angela Merkel's Conservative, have nominated right-winger Markus Söder as their candidate for state premier in a regional election. And basically, the future of current Premier Horst Seehofer, a Merkel ally, had been in question since last September's general election. And so the lawmakers unilaterally agreed to nominate Söder, who's a fierce critic of Merkel's refugee policy. So that's that problem with democracy. Sooner or later, the will of the people will make itself known. Meanwhile, over at the Alternative for Germany party, they've nominated a new leadership duo from its nationalist wing, basically building on their triumphant turnout in September's general election. And again, these are people who are sharply critical of the open borders policy. So Merkel's in trouble. She couldn't form a coalition government. And now I think the message is coming through that if new elections are held, Merkel may well be out. And these people in these countries, they have a valid concern, because according to this article out of Zero Hedge, the European Union summit held in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, the coast of Ivory, on November 29th and 30th has ended in failure after the 55 African and 28 European leaders were unable to agree on basic measures to prevent potentially tens of millions of African migrants from flooding into Europe. The only thing they did agree with was to evacuate the 3,800 African migrants currently stranded in Libya. That's Soros and the globalist plan. Flood everybody into each other's countries, erase their cultural uniqueness under the guise of diversity. This is an attack on your history, your identity, your culture, to turn the entire human population into this single mass of very confused, unsure, paralyzed by political correctness worker bees. Soros is not doing all of this for the benefit of the human race. He's doing it for the benefit of the money junkies. It'll be a new feudalism, with the vast majority of the human population reduced to serfdom. Now, Jacob Rees-Mogg skewers a BBC host. The host was out there saying that, you know, we've got to rethink this Brexit thing. And Jacob said that Britain must leave the EU completely no later than 2019. So that is heating up. And a lot of people are saying, we've made the decision. Why aren't we going? Well, Tony Blair is out there already campaigning, saying it's absolutely necessary that Brexit doesn't happen. And he wants a second referendum on withdrawal from the European Union, because apparently the attempt to steal that election failed the last time. And, you know, if at first you don't succeed in stealing an election, try again. So Phony Tony is out there trying to reverse Brexit. And remember, the reason he's got the name Phony Tony, he was the guy who came out with that dodgy dossier during the war with Iraq that was actually plagiarized from a 12-year-old student thesis paper and was woefully out of date and inaccurate. But I think all these supporters of the New World Order, they're supporting it for financial inducements, but I think most of them are also dreaming of the day when their own rear end might get a chance to sit on the golden throne of planet Earth. And Tony certainly has the ego to be seeing himself in that role. Now, apparently, Theresa May's concessions to the EU in the current Brexit negotiations have triggered a Tory backlash. And what's coming out of Parliament is this idea, we have already given them way too much, stuff that was never in the original EU compact. There's nothing in the article about leaving the EU that says you have to have a divorce payment anyway. And of course, we know why the EU wants the divorce payment. Without the money they siphon out of Great Britain, many of those other member states in the EU are going to be in serious trouble. And Germany is not going to want to carry that load all by themselves. So they're trying to hold together the EU, keep Britain in there, because all these countries wanting to go back to being sovereign, independent nations, that's the wrong direction to the globalists. Catalonia wants to break on off. Germany's already, some German people are already talking about getting out of the EU. Britain is on its way out of the EU. France and Italy have been talking about it. It's all breaking up here. Now, as you know, last week we had this verdict come down in the Kate Steinle case, where she was shot and killed by an illegal immigrant with an illegally owned firearm on Pier 14 in San Francisco at a distance of 78 feet. The illegal immigrant claims he was shooting at something else, and the ricochet killed this woman. And by some amazing machinations, he was acquitted on first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and manslaughter. All they convicted him on was being an illegal immigrant and having the illegal firearm. Now, the Department of Justice has filed a new arrest warrant for him. He's not getting out of this thing just yet. But it's amazing. Over at the Washington Compost, they actually had an editorial that said, if you're upset about the Kate Steinle verdict, then you're a white nationalist. The only reason you're upset about this illegal immigrant not being charged with murder is you're a racist. I think the reverse is true. I think political pressure was brought to that judge and that court so that this murder issue wouldn't be a factor in the continued discussion about sanctuary states and sanctuary cities. Because this guy had already been deported 6 times, and he kept coming back on over, heading for those sanctuary cities, and Kate is now dead because of it. Now, a Republican congressman just introduced a bill today that will threaten huge fines and prison time for elected officials accused of sheltering illegal immigrant chemicals from deportation. Now, there's already a law on the books. It's under Title VIII. So somebody ought to be indicting these San Francisco officials and put them on trial for a life sentence. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. And Aloha America, welcome back to the show here, and we already gave you the address for you to support Republic Broadcasting earlier in the show, and you can always get it at the Republic Broadcasting website. And folks, we wouldn't be asking if we didn't really need it. Between having to replace hardware, paying higher fees for server services and internet connections and the rest of it, we do need your help, or we will be silenced. All right, let's take a phone call now. Let's go to Kathleen in Paris. Aloha, Kathleen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. What's on my mind? Last week, I believe it was Brendan from San Francisco called in to talk about Democracy Now! And so I just wanted to support him that I was the same. I was listening to Democracy Now! And then I discovered that, you know, there's something like, I guess, what you call controlled opposition or something. But I saw that interview between Julian Assange and what's her name?
Amy Goodman.
Amy Goodman on yeah, and I saw that interview, and it was just nearly a cat fight in the street, you know. So it's really interesting. So people should search that and just to see that, but then never go to Democracy Now! Again. But instead of just talking down on that one, I thought I would mention some places I get really good news. Corbett Report.
Yes.
Most people know about James Corbett.
Yep.
And most people know about Paul Craig Roberts.
Yes.
But maybe Larkin Rose is a good one to learn about voluntarism. Larkin Rose. Also, Jeff Berwick on the Dollar Vigilante.
Mm-hmm.
He knows a lot about Bitcoin, too, if you want to learn more about that, which it's way too complicated for me, but you do get some good information from him. Jeff Berwick, the Dollar Vigilante. And he has another site that he puts up in different places, YouTube, but maybe other places now because, oh, well, what's the one? Steam it. And it's called the Anarchast.
Okay.
Because, you know, a play on broadcast and anarchy.
Yes.
And he asks all the guests on his show, he says, when did you become an anarchist? And it's quite interesting. Also, Newsbud. Sadly, well, Newsbud is great. It's just some of it's behind a paywall.
Yes. Well, we're trying to avoid doing that here at Republic and at What Really Happened. Anyway, Kathleen, thank you for the list of the sites here. I'm going to let you go. We got more news to get to and little time to get to it, so thank you very much for the phone call. Now then, this problem of immigrants basically exploiting the revolving door on our border is illustrated by this individual who shot that woman in San Francisco. He'd been back and forth 6 times. But apparently there is this other stink up in the state of Oregon, which was America's first sanctuary state, and apparently an illegal alien from Mexico was convicted of sexual assault after being deported 20 times from the U.S. and just coming on back. And basically in Oregon, law enforcement is blocked from detaining people who are in the U.S. illegally if they have not broken other laws. And apparently when this Martinez was finally had his day in court, he was grinning when relatives of the victims, I mean, he attacked 2 women in one day. This guy was just having the time of his life. And he has a long list of low-level drug offenses, disorderly conduct, and other misdemeanors. And the globalists want a world in which just people who are like that, yeah, welcome them into your homes. Now, a little bit of good news just came over the wires. The Supreme Court has upheld Donald Trump's travel ban. And it's basically stayed the lower court's injunctions as of today. And remember, this was not an anti-Muslim ban. This was a ban on certain countries whose citizens are notorious for not liking Americans. And if you're in one of those countries, it doesn't matter if you're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Pastafarian, atheist, you're still going to get the same treatment coming through the border checks. And it makes perfect sense in this world of heightened terrorist threat to start doing something about it. But of course the liberals and the globalists are going to say, oh, it's racist, it's this, it's that. But you look at all these things that are happening. You know, the dead girl in San Francisco, the multiple rapes in Oregon. This is not a policy that is in the best interests of the American people, or for that matter, the people of Europe. And it is time for this policy to be reversed. It's time to find a way to stop this push towards the New World Order, because we can all see what quality of life will be like under this. We'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here. And again, getting back to this whole sanctuary city nonsense. Out in California, Judicial Watch has filed a taxpayer lawsuit challenging San Francisco's sheriff's sanctuary policy. And the lawsuit challenges restrictions on the ability of sheriff's deputies to communicate freely with immigration and customs enforcement about inmates' citizenship, immigration status, and release dates. So apparently the lower courts tried to throw this lawsuit out. The Superior Court of California has just said, we reject that. The lawsuit can go forward. But again, all of these are Title 8 violations. All right, let's get into the world of the soaring obsession with sexual assault cases. And again, I want to admonish everybody that yes, sometimes this stuff happens, and other times the accusations are being made for reasons of revenge, extortion, political gain, 15 minutes in the national media. So each case must be evaluated on the face of it. And I think a very telling indicator is if you look at Roy Moore, how he came on out and said this is all nonsense, and ultimately that turned out to be the case. And then you have other individuals who have come on out and said, well, yeah, it actually did happen, and obviously they're the ones who are not trying to smear their accusers. Well, apparently Russell Simmons, the actor, has been fired from the upcoming all-deaf comedy series because he's been accused of sexual assault, and he's notorious for constantly trashing President Trump and calling him a white supremacist. Now, Democrat Representative Ruben Kihuen has been called on to resign by Nancy Pelosi. This guy's a dreamer Democrat, over his sexual harassment allegations that surfaced in a BuzzFeed article. And it's hitting anywhere. For you classical music fans, you opera fans especially, the Metropolitan Opera has suspended its peerless former music director, James Levine, in the wake of on-the-record allegations of sexual misconduct reported in the New York Times. And the suspension will preclude Levine's participation in several high-profile events crucial to the nonprofit's financial health, including the upcoming New Year's Eve debut of a new production of Puccini's Tosca, for you opera fans. And, of course, we all know about Harvey Weinstein and all these other people who are being accused of sexual assault and everything. So you would think that maybe the industry and the media would want to tone this down and not fan the flames any higher. But, oh, it is not to be, because Hollywood just released a movie, Call Me By Your Name, which is a movie about a pedophile relationship, an adult man's sexual relationship with an underage boy, and it's just been selected as the best picture by the Los Angeles Film Critics Association. I guess they're trying to put the wood back in Hollywood. But that has to rank as one of the most ill-advised decisions. And having been in the industry, I know that politics plays a lot in this. And I'm sure there was a tremendous amount of pressure to name this picture Best Picture to try and legitimize this kind of behavior, to convince people it's not that big a deal when their elected officials are caught doing it, as seems to be more and more likely to come on out. Or they're trying to make it acceptable behavior. And to be fair and honest, in other cultures and other times, these kind of relationships were acceptable. But they're not here. And this is a movie I certainly will have no interest in seeing whatsoever. Not at all. Now, getting into the worlds of computers and computer secrecy, it turns out that the NSA has been helping to convict defendants in U.S. courts. This was a classified document that came on out, and apparently the NSA got around the rules requiring such evidence and its sources to be made available to the defense by simply sharing the information with prosecutors who would then go on out and develop a parallel case of proof, with the NSA telling them, this is where you look and you'll find what you're looking for. And so the individual in this particular case, Kurbanov, has been sentenced to 25 years in prison, after which he'll be deported to Uzbekistan. And he's an apparent success story for U.S. counterterrorism officials. And this is a bad guy. There's no question about it. Meanwhile, BRICS, along with their own electronic funds transfer system, along with their own gold brokerage, they're now talking about creating their own internet, specifically so that it's not under the surveillance of the NSA and the CIA. See, when the internet was originally set up as the ARPANET, all communications were peer-to-peer. There was no central clearing facility. There was no central switcher, because that would be a point of vulnerability in the event of a war. And that's what made the internet able to suffer damage and shutdowns. But more and more these days, we've been seeing how the internet is being transformed, where everybody is going through central servers, cloud servers in particular. Skype went through that. Skype was originally peer-to-peer, and it worked great. Now they've moved to the cloud, and on top of the Skype desktop application being a huge CPU hog, the quality of service has definitely declined. Now, anybody can set up an internet. All it takes is the will to do it, and go back to the way it was in the early days of the internet. Because the problem with these central servers is they become targets. When you have all the data in one place, that becomes hugely attractive to cyber criminals or foreign agents for foreign governments. Now then, a few years ago, there was a huge lawsuit against Lenovo, and they settled for $3.5 million for pre-installing adware on laptops without the user's consent. I remember when that was the norm. You'd get a computer and it would just be full of all of this stuff. It would take you 2-3 days to just pry it all out there. And apparently Hewlett-Packard may now be in a similar legal position, because according to numerous reports gathered by Computer World, Hewlett-Packard is deploying spyware on PCs without the user's consent. And apparently they're using a telemetry client, which is uploaded by the Connected User Experience and Telemetry component, to spy on customers' computers without asking their permission. And apparently the software is called the HP Touchpoint Analytics Service. And consumers are noticing because the thing is a CPU hog. And it's slowing down the computers. Maybe that's why the sudden jump in CPU load on the desktop Skype. Maybe it's sending information someplace. So I'm glad we're not using that anymore. Now down, let's see, in other news, Planned Parenthood is it? Oh, actually, we're going to take a phone call. Let's go to the phones. Curtis in Nevada. Aloha, Curtis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Curtis, are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I hear you just fine. What's on your mind?
Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think that that if we actually go to war with North Korea, that would be the last straw that the world would tolerate. A country that they think that the citizens are totally behind this war machine that, known as America. They've seen in the last 15 years that we've been behind and honoring our troops. And so I think that people have to understand all this talk about honoring the troops and thanking them for their service and all that. Those are just propaganda ploys. That it's misdirection. The real reason they want you to focus on that and to look away from the fact is, why are they deploying our troops in the first place, perpetually? And that's the problem with people. They're shallow, superficial. They don't go beyond face value of what they hear. And
well,
so
that's not as true today as it was a while ago. And first of all, I know this is going to sound like a dichotomy because I'm opposed to all these wars of conquest. I'm very worried that we may have a nuclear war to deal with in the very, very near future. But I think our military people, the rank and file, ought to be remembered and honored because these are people who took the oath, put on the uniform, did what they were told, and then they come back home and try and adjust. And I think one of the reasons why they're reinforcing that we should show respect to our military veterans is because of something that happened during Vietnam, when the returning Vietnam soldiers were being protested at their airports, and that may have actually been a staged propaganda stunt to try and build sympathy, but it backfired because a lot of those veterans started having real serious problems about what it was they'd really been doing in Vietnam. And it exacerbated the drug problems, the suicide problems, and also led to a lot more of those Vietnam veterans speaking out about what had really been going on over there. But you're absolutely right. They're trying to put a beautiful face on the machinery of war and death for those people who are still buying into that nonsense. But again, if you look at the corporate media's audience numbers versus the independent media, it's not working. A lot of people are just sick and tired of the wars. We've been at war, major war, for 16 years. We've been at sort of covert, beyond your notice wars for longer before that. But we have been at war for 16 years, and the American people are tired of it. They're tired of the war economy. They're tired of all the lies.
Right, but I think American people have to make it known because the rest of the world thinks that we're on board with everything that the United States is doing, and if things end badly, they're not going to have any mercy for our warmongering civilization. That's my point. I mean, being a veteran, for one thing, even veterans, after one deployment, they kind of realize that what they went for and what they saw is not exactly the same thing. And after 2 or 3, they should know better. They're not robots, they have minds of their own. And a lot of them are actually getting into that mercenary type of mentality, almost like the cops are getting into. That's what I'm saying. A lot of us were veterans and we never saw combat. We just signed up for 3 years and we were out. So there is a difference you know, between those that actually went through it. But at some point, you know, they have to, hey, you know, I'm not a professional soldier for life. I have to get out of this. This isn't what I signed up to defend my country, not to just kill brown people legally, which is what basically we've been doing for the past 15 years. Okay,
well,
so I mean,
there's a couple of factors.
I'm just saying, you know, all these people shouting USA, USA, they're shallow and superficial, and they have to get their head out of their rear and realize this, they're being played.
Well, first of all, you're absolutely correct that we Americans who see the wars for what they really are, we do need to make it known to other countries that this government doesn't have our support and backing, because I'm very concerned, first of all, that the U.S. is going to lose this war ultimately, and my concern is that 50 years from now, the American people will be under a collective guilt like we see the people of Germany are today, even though most of the people of Germany weren't even born when the Nazis were in power. And I don't want to see the Americans have to go through that. As far as the soldiers, you need to remember that after one deployment, they don't have the option of leaving because of the stop-loss policy. And they will get sent back and sent back for as long as they're considered useful until they fry. In fact, I remember there was that attack on an army base that was blamed on a Muslim, and there were indications that what had really happened is this group of military had just returned from Iraq from their third deployment, and they all thought they were getting on out, and they were informed that no, they were being sent back for a fourth deployment, and there was actually a refusal to go, a rebellion in the ranks, if you were, and that was the real story. And they didn't want the American people to know that we were back to fragging, which we saw a lot of in Vietnam, and so they found some convenient Muslim to blame it on.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, I just want to, one last point. I just, you know, this guy, he kind of creeps me out. I'm sorry, I'm blanking out. I'm in my 60s also, but Trump's son-in-law, I mean, when I look at him, Kushner, he gives me that Damien creeping feeling. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I try not to judge people by their faces, but certainly the eyes can give away a lot. And one thing that always worries me is anybody who can't get the smirk off their face, because they just think they can do anything and get away with it. And unfortunately, in our society, above a certain level, you can. Yeah,
he looks too serious to me. I'm scared of this guy. Anyway, Mike, thanks. Have a good show. I'll keep listening.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot. I mean, Kushner definitely has been playing a much more important role behind the scenes than anybody really thought. I mean, but, you know, why is he there other than these friends of Israel? And I thought nepotism was kind of an outdated concept. Of course, you know, we had George Herbert Walker Bush and then George W. Bush. So I guess the White House is just a family business. It's just whose family is currently in charge. All right, phone lines are open. So let's get back to the story about Planned Parenthood. And apparently the FBI is investigating Planned Parenthood and its associates for the sale of aborted babies' body parts for profits. And it's the latest development in a scandal that began in 2015 with the release of these explosive undercover videos. And these videos showed abortion industry executives haggling over the price of hearts, livers, brains, and kidneys, and describing in chilling detail their techniques for crushing late-term babies to get the freshest organs. So apparently the Senate Judiciary Committee and the House Select Investigative Panel on Infant Lives, they've spent a year and a half with a national investigation, 30,000 pages of documents. And they found enough evidence to refer several Planned Parenthood affiliates and tissue procurement companies for potential prosecution. And Attorney General Jeff Sessions suggested that if the FBI concurs, charges might be filed. Then there was the second punch, and that was where the 8th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals declined to revisit its ruling that the state of Arkansas can redirect Medicaid funds away from abortion businesses like Planned Parenthood, which the state is completely justified in doing, considering the ongoing baby parts scandal. So we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, even though Iran has surrendered its highly enriched uranium, and even though they never were building bombs, they're still conducting nuclear research. And apparently, they have mastered the technology to build nuclear batteries. This makes them the 5th country worldwide to have developed this technology after Russia, France, Great Britain, and the United States. And these batteries are used in the health sector and other industrial fields to power cardiac pacemakers or advanced laptops. And basically, it's a very miniaturized version of what is called a radioisotope thermoelectric generator. And there is a decaying isotope in there. There's no nuclear fission going on. But the heat from the decaying isotope is enough to generate electricity using a thermocouple. And we use them on the Viking landers, and there's a similar unit on Curiosity. This allows them to operate even when the solar panels are not being illuminated, which got to be a problem with Freedom and Opportunity when they were on Mars. There's always been, of course, a tremendous opposition to the use of these RTGs in spacecraft or civilian spacecraft. The military use them all the time because of what happened on Apollo 13 when the radioisotope that was going to fuel the RTG for the Apollo Lunar Surface Experiment Package, the ALSEP, plunged into the Pacific with the lunar module after bringing the astronauts back home after the command module explosion and everything. So there is a little bit of a concern. But these are very nice units, and Tehran is doing good because these are peaceful uses of nuclear power to which Iran is entitled under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. I mean, I don't know about you. I would love a laptop that I didn't have to worry about charging for 10 or 15 years. Not that laptops these days would ever last anywhere near that long. Now, Google is doing a lot of experimenting with artificial intelligence, and they have reached a very interesting threshold, and that is that they have created an AI called AutoML. It's an artificial intelligence that's capable of creating other artificial intelligences. In other words, it can reproduce and evolve. And we'll see where that goes. There have been earlier efforts to try and design better computer algorithms through a process that was called computational evolution, basically taking advantage of supercomputer speed to have billions of trial and error to try and solve problems. But apparently, one of Google's other AIs has developed imaging technology that's well above what humans are able to do. So we're at a point right now where computers are designing other computers and systems, and we humans don't know how they work, which is going to make servicing them and repairing them or controlling them that much more difficult. We've got to take a break for station ID. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And one more story just came on in here, and this gets back to media stars who are sexual abusers. And this goes back to Bill O'Reilly. And apparently there were these 6 women that were paid a settlement for what supposedly happened between Bill O'Reilly and these women. But one of the women has now sued Fox News and Bill O'Reilly for defamation and breach of contract, basically because O'Reilly's statements on air discounting the truth of the allegations damaged her reputation and depicted her as a liar. And according to the final settlement agreement, nobody was supposed to talk about this stuff. So, Bill. Now, getting on back to the world of computers. As you know, Kaspersky is one of the premier computer security software packages in the world. And not too long ago, underneath this idea of Russia spying on everybody, the U.S. government banned the use of Kaspersky products on all government computer systems, which I don't agree with. Kaspersky responded by saying they would allow their source code to be inspected. That's proprietary trade secrets right there. But they were willing to let the code get looked at to satisfy everybody that in point of fact there are no Russian backdoors in there. And now, of course, we know that a lot of these hacking allegations were actually an inside leak. Well, now Great Britain has gone down the same path. Their National Cybersecurity Center has banned the use of Kaspersky products from government departments and revealed it's trying to prevent the transfer of UK data to the Russian state through Kaspersky Labs software. Well, I understand wanting to secure your data, but frankly, I'd be much more worried about all the CIA, NSA backdoors built into the hardware, not to mention Israel, which has the highest per capita of hackers in the world. Speaking of the NSA, they've had another embarrassing situation where secure information was left on an open Amazon cloud storage server. Didn't even have a password. Anybody who found it could download it. And these unprotected storage buckets have become a recurring theme in recent data leaks and exposures. Accenture, Verizon, and Viacom were all dinged by unsecured data. Now, this file in particular, it's a virtual disk image containing over 100 gigabytes of data from an Army intelligence project codenamed Red Disk. And the disk image belongs to the U.S. Army's Intelligence and Security Command, known as INSCOM, which is a division of both the Army and the NSA. They overlap there. And so now that is out there in the dark web. So the storage server has now been secured, but that's like closing the barn door after the cows have escaped here. Now, PayPal has disclosed a data breach that may have compromised personally identifiable information for roughly 1.6 million customers at a payment processing company PayPal acquired earlier this year. And I think at this point, given that these companies are unable or unwilling to protect our private data, it's time for us to refuse to give our private data to them or to the government, which is also notoriously lax with control of sensitive personal information. And let's see what we have here. Now, here's a little bit of good news. Apparently, there is a bill being introduced in Congress that would provide jail time for corporate executives who conceal these data breaches. Because one of the big stinks that we have seen over the last couple of years is we'll find out about the data breach months after it actually happened. And if your data has been breached at a company, you need to know now so you can freeze your credit or take whatever other steps are necessary to protect yourself. So I'm in agreement with that. All right, let's go ahead and take some phone calls now. We're going to start with Jennifer in Dallas. Aloha, Jennifer. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. Okay, I want to talk about these hate crimes,
yes.
These hoax hate crimes.
Yes.
Before I even listen to you on the radio, before I even took the red pill, right? I was watching the news in Dallas, Texas. Which you have to know about Dallas. There's several pockets of Dallas that have really nice neighborhoods. So there's Highland Park and there's really nice neighborhoods, right? Well, there's this Jewish guy that was having all these meetings. This Jewish he's having lots of church meetings at his house, right?
Yes.
And he was parking all the cars over the whole neighborhood in this cul-de-sac, right? He was just filling it up with these cars. And so the people in the neighborhood were they're going, well, this is kind of a burden on us, right? All these cars in our neighborhood. Well, all of a sudden that was one story where people complained felt like he was being hate, whatever. Well, 2 days later, on another news story, someone wrote a swastika on his house. Same guy.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I think he did that. I think I was, even back then, I was going, I think he did that to himself, But no one ever said that. So the next story on the news was, a hate crime. Someone wrote a swastika on his house, and all the neighbors were going well, we didn't do that, We just we're kind of mad about all the cars here in the neighborhood. We don't hate him, And so I'm pretty sure that was total a total farce, you know,
it
but
may
it
well
never
be.
came out that way, you know?
It may well be. I mean, there was a recent study that came on out and said a large percentage of these hate crimes are hoaxes. And it may be that some of the hate crimes that are out there were hoaxes that have never been exposed, because nothing will get you media attention faster than a claim that you're the victim of a hate crime. And they are being used for political purposes. There's no question about that. Now, in the case of this individual gentleman, I don't know what the zoning laws are down there in Texas, but I know around here, if you're going to hold religious services, you have to have some kind of a facility that's zoned for that kind of activity, whether it's an actual church or maybe you're using an empty retail vacancy at a local shopping mall, which actually there's a lot of that around here as well, where there's more than adequate parking outside for the cars to be. So I question this gentleman's judgment in trying to start a church in his home, knowing he had inadequate parking. So that being set aside, no, there have been some very, very famous hoax crimes. There was that teacher out at Claremont College that painted swastikas on her own car. There was a student at Georgetown University where she claimed that she was a victim of anti-Semitic hate, but the security cameras had caught her painting the swastika on her own door. So these things do happen. There was a big famous one called the Tawana Brawley rape hoax, and during the heyday of the 1990s rape hysteria, there was a major hoax up in Davis, California, that almost led to the passing of a males-only curfew before the hoax was revealed.
What's so weird is, like, whenever I saw this story, it was before I even was even thinking like this way. And I was like, well, that's so odd that, like, 2 days ago these people are complaining about, you know, all this traffic, and then all of a sudden there's a swastika on this front porch. I'm like, I mean, of course I assume he did it, you know, like.
Well, you have a healthy sense of skepticism, and that's what's needed to survive in these dark times.
Right. Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate your show, and, like, I listen every day, and I love you and Claire. Thank you very much for everything you do.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words. We're going to do a shout-out now for our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network, and we're going to go back to the telephones. Sarah in Massachusetts, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha to you as well, Mike. By the way, I used to listen to you on KKCR back in the day because I myself lived in Hawaii, even though I'm on the East Coast now.
Boy.
Those are the old days.
Well, that was with Mike Vanderveer. I was a guest on his show, and sadly he's no longer with us, and we all miss him.
We do. He was wonderful. But KKCR lives on, and that's a great thing.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm my heart's still in Hawaii, and this news story caught my attention about the Honolulu Police Department sending out letters to medical marijuana patients, ordering them to surrender their firearms.
Yes. Yeah, that's really happening. Yeah, no, we covered it a while back, and it strikes me as just another excuse to start grabbing guns, because if you look at people who are smoking marijuana, they're not going to be likely to flip out and do something with their firearms. It's the meth heads that are going to be dangerous, but of course there's no legal meth, so they can't go around and send letters out to these registered users. But again, people who smoke marijuana, they get mellow, they get peaceful, they write poetry, they play music. They don't have a tendency toward violence. In fact, they're less violent on a per capita basis than people who drink alcohol. And nobody's taking guns away from people who are drinking alcohol.
Well, I know the whole thing is just a ludicrous. I don't know how they're going to get away with this.
Well, I hope there'll be a court challenge on the basis of the Second Amendment, because nobody can make a case that smoking marijuana makes you potentially more violent.
I know, of all people to go after. I mean, it's just they're so paranoid about marijuana in Hawaii anyway. They used to do this green harvest with helicopters, such a waste of resources, flying around looking for backyard plants.
Yes.
And meanwhile, the meth epidemic it's an epidemic.
Yeah, it is, and it really is. And our police seem more dedicated to getting on out there and writing these hugely expensive traffic fines than actually dealing with the problem. But I'm one of those people who thinks marijuana ought to be legalized completely, and it would certainly be a boost to Hawaii's agriculture economy, because long after the sugar has gone and the pineapple business is dwindling, up in those mountains on Maui, the plants are growing.
Well, I know. And can we not find something better to do with those fallow fields than allow the Monsanto in to do their experiments? I mean, they just don't seem to care.
No, it's all about the money, and Monsanto has enough money to buy politicians, and they've made Hawaii a testing ground for GMO plants on the theory that if there's a mistake and something nasty crawls out of those fields, that it's contained here in Hawaii and won't get back to the mainland. Of course, that is utterly ridiculous, because when the first humans arrived here in Hawaii, probably from the Marquesas, the island was already covered with all kinds of plant life that had simply flown in on the wind or on birds or drifted across the ocean on branches that had broken off on the coastlines of these other places. And so, yeah, there's still a big fight going on about the GMO here in Hawaii, and most of the local Hawaiians do not want it here.
Yeah, I was quite active with the anti-GMO movement on Kauai, and it's kind of at a stalemate at the moment, I think. But here in Massachusetts, I was surprised that they passed the recreational use just a year ago. I myself did not partake, but I'm all for it being legalized. It's ridiculous that it's not. It's a plant from God. Hello. So... Well, anyway, this is my first time to call, but I listen regularly, and thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Well, thank you very much, and aloha nui.
Aloha nui.
All right, we're going to let you go here. And, of course, I don't indulge in the evil weed because it is illegal. But if it were legalized, yeah. If you go back and you look, there's been a lot of research that shows that marijuana is actually far better for you than either tobacco or alcohol. And smoking marijuana stimulates brain cells to grow, which is why when Cheech Marin went on Jeopardy with one of the supposedly intellectual talking heads of the corporate media, he just rolled right over him with the depth of his amazing knowledge here. So anyway, off on that one. Let's get back to human-caused global warming, because it's out there and it's coming to get you. And it was announced a couple of days ago, Britain should start getting ready for the big freeze, because the Arctic blasts are expected to bring temperatures as low as -10 degrees centigrade across Great Britain. And because of all this propaganda about human-caused global warming, concern is already being expressed that cities and communities aren't as prepared for this winter as they should be, because they've been listening to all this stuff about how the world is warming, winters are going to be milder. Back in 2000, they said snowfalls are a thing of the past. Right now, it's snowing down in Tasmania, which wouldn't sound all that shocking, except that down there, it's their summer. Below the equator, it is summertime, not wintertime, and it's snowing in Tasmania. And apparently they had reports of up to 40 centimeters of snow in the Central Highlands. Now, apparently, there's this lady, Susan Crockford, and she is a scientist. And interestingly enough, she doesn't deny climate change or even talk about it, but she does talk about polar bears. And in some of her recent reports, she's cleared up some misconceptions about polar bears that have been published in the corporate media and promoted by the global warming cultists, if you will. The polar bears are not drowning. They're not hovering on the edge of extinction. In fact, they have grown in numbers over the last few years to the point where they're considered a pest, and it is now legal to hunt them. But despite that, a paper published November 29th in the American Institute of Biological Sciences basically came on out and called Susan Crawford a denier. She's a denier. And they're using that word deliberately to try and equate those who doubt human-caused global warming to equate them with Holocaust deniers. That's why you're a denier. And it's a smear job. Because if you go back to the 1990s when all of this human-caused global warming was really getting fanned on up, and you look at all the dire predictions and warnings and promises of catastrophe, none of them happened. None of them happened. And now the scientists are trying to backtrack and say, well, there was an error in our data, or we overestimated this or estimated that, because that's better than saying we were lying to you, which is what was really going on. But that's how government keeps you under control. They present you with one after the other, after the other, after the other, of impending disaster and doom, and then they'll offer to sell you a solution for a small increase in taxes and a small decrease in your personal liberties. So let's talk about vaccines, because it's that time of year. It's time for the flu vaccine. Get your flu vaccine. Apparently, according to this story, it was a YouTube video, the corporate media wants you to believe that all vaccines are 100% safe and effective, but apparently this last year, flu shot injuries have gone up 1,000%. That's a 10-fold increase, an order of magnitude. And somebody says vaccines are totally harmless, then you have to ask them, why has the federal government paid out $3.7 billion for vaccine injuries if they're really safe? We have victims of the Gardasil vaccine speaking out. We had that report that came on out a couple of weeks ago about the way the flu vaccine is manufactured actually distorts it and turns it into a form that is a threat to chickens, not humans. So you get the shot with all the adjuvants in there like the aluminum, and it doesn't really protect you from human flu. You're being vaccinated against chicken flu. And that's the real reason why the flu vaccines are not effective, and they've admitted to that as well. Now this in turn has prompted a little bit of a backlash, not just from patients, but even within the industry and government itself. And when we come back from this next break, I will elucidate further. Aloha America, welcome back to the show here. Now, as I teased before the break here, there is beginning to be a backlash over the issue of research fraud. And we're not talking about somebody made a mistake with a calculator. We're talking about deliberate, intentional fraud to create science to order for whoever gave you the grant to do the research. We saw a lot of this when Al Gore first came on out with human-caused global warming and said, we've got millions of dollars to give out to scientists who can prove human-caused global warming. And scientists, individual scientists, are just as corruptible as individual lawyers, individual politicians, individual clergy. And they said, yes, give me the grant money. I will prove humans are warming the earth. There's also been a major problem with fraudulent medical research. And it has come out recently that a lot of these so-called journals have had to retract large numbers of articles that supported this or that medical treatment because they detected fraud. So apparently over in Great Britain, they're considering a new law where scientists who are caught engaging in fraud in their research will go to jail. And I think it's a good idea. I think it's a very, very good idea because these people do this because they get away with it. Nothing bad happens. At the very worst, their article gets retracted. But if you're a full-time professional scientist, you've written dozens, if not hundreds of articles, so one or two being taken back is no big deal, and you still have your grants and your grant money. Unless you acquired that fraudulently, and star of the global warming movement, Michael Mann, faced some allegations about that as well. That's why we have a scientific method. Scientists understand up front that human beings are flawed, frail, entities. And individual scientists can get caught up with their ambition or with the desires of their funding body or just the desire to be famous and having discovered something amazing. And these biases and these pressures can lead to a loss of objectivity. So scientific method exists as a way of determining the truth outside human agency. You don't listen to somebody's opinion. And scientific method is why you do things, or supposed to do things, as double-blind studies. All of these are measures taken in recognition of the fact that due to the huge amounts of money that float around medical research and the products that these researchers will produce and endorse, the temptation is simply too great. And chief among the tenets of the scientific method is reproducibility. And that is, if one scientist mixes together some chemicals and he gets something wonderful and he publishes, other scientists should be able to take the same recipe, if you will, mix up the same chemicals, get the same result. And if they don't, there's a problem. Maybe it's a mistake on the part of the original author. Maybe it's a contamination that snuck on in. You have to check everything. But fraud is, in fact, rampant everywhere in our society these days, it seems like. But I'm in agreement with that suggested law in Great Britain that scientists who commit research fraud ought to go to jail. That'll tamp that down real quick here. Now, over in the Philippines, they're facing a major problem. They just launched a vaccine program against dengue fever, which is nasty stuff. I had a mild case of it myself a couple of years ago. But apparently, once the shots were already administered, 733,000 people, the pharmaceutical company Sanofi Pasteur admitted the clinical data showed Dengvaxia, which is the first licensed dengue vaccine, could make the disease worse in people who had not previously been infected with the virus. So it's not only not protecting these people against dengue fever, if they get it, it will be worse because of the vaccine. So another case of profit ahead of patience here. There was a story that came out in Natural Blaze about this woman who 10 years ago took her child to the doctors over strep throat and literally went through a situation where, you know, the nurse said, you got to get your kid up to date on the vaccines, and the mother said, no, I'm concerned about their safety and efficacy. And the nurse apparently walked back in with a loaded syringe with who knows what was in there and literally blocked the door and told the mother, you will not leave until your daughter is up to date on the vaccines. And the mother whips out her phone and says, you let us out or I'm calling the police right now. And then shortly thereafter, when she got out of there with her daughter, she was told that she was no longer allowed to come to that clinic. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones now, and we're going to start with Tom in Florida. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, good day to you, Michael. Yeah, Mike, what is on my mind is the Supreme Court just passed a decision 7-2 to help Donald Trump with the travel ban. And you got the leftist little midget, Ginsburg, and the other schmucker, Sotomayor, going for it. And 7 of them told him forget it. And now Trump's went in again. And there you go, Michael. I mean, this is what we need, these kind of victories to straighten this country out, because look what's going on in Germany, Michael, Merkel, Berserkel.
Yeah.
They're right now, she's losing power like crazy. And I'm going to tell you, I'd like, maybe you can answer this for me, is Merkel, does she have any kids? And if she doesn't, why is she trying to rape Germany with all these Muslims? Because it seems like to me she's a Stasi East German who has no kids, but she wants to flood that place with a bunch of Muslims. What is the modus operandi with her?
Well,
and Israel now with Michael Flynn.
It's not just Muslims. Germany's being flooded also with African migrants. It's not the particular class of migrants. It's just Merkel is supporting that open borders globalist policy. And apparently she's tangled up very much with the New World Order people, George Soros, and is just intent on telling the people of Germany, look, you don't get to decide who comes into your country and who doesn't anymore. It's up to us, and we think everybody should be allowed in. They have a right to enjoy the wonderful civilization that exists in Germany, which is so much better than the countries that they left. Forgetting, of course, that the culture in every nation is built by the people of that nation, and if the people in Africa, for example, wanted to have the same kind of architecture, engineering, and culture that the Germans, they would have built it long before now. And so what the New World Order is doing is they're going out to these countries that have very low standards of living and saying, we're going to let you come on into these places that have got clean water and indoor plumbing and proper sanitation and beautiful buildings, and you're just welcome to come on in and act like it's all yours now. And the German people have really had enough of it. I think the people of Sweden are not far behind.
Well, no, Michael, absolutely. The people of Sweden know the crime rate is off the chain over in Sweden. And the German people are finally waking up, and they're fed up with this Merkel. But Merkel, she was a Stasi East German. And my facts are right. I don't believe she has any children. So if she don't have no offspring, of course she's going to flood the place because she don't even think about her own bloodline. So literally she is going to try to destroy it. Might say, that guy Soros needs to be arrested. I don't know why Interpol and somebody needs to get hold of this guy and put him in prison for what he's done to mankind. So Europe, in the United States, this guy definitely needs to be arrested. Okay? This is the biggest crime story of all time, not Trump and the Russian dossier and all that. It's this guy Soros. And you look at this guy Weinstein and this Wiener, they get away with murder. It's unbelievable. And then you got Flynn in trouble because he was talking to the Russians about Israel settlements. Is that what I'm hearing about the settlements of Israel? So they're making up. What's going on here?
Well, it's a corrupted system. It's a corrupted system, and you know, Israel is pulling strings all over the world. But nobody ever talks about that. Soros is definitely interfering in the internal politics of many nations, and nobody calls him on that. They're just obsessed with this idea, we're going to prove that Russia exercised undue influence in the 2016 elections. And so far, after nearly a year, they've come up with zero. But the corporate media's job is to keep pushing this idea until the American people forget all about Israel's interference in our country, George Soros' interference in our country, and say, oh, wow, so many people are saying Trump is guilty, I guess it must be so.
Well, Michael, you're right. You know what? The biggest treason that ever happened in this country, and I remember I told you on your show before, was when Casper Weinberger told Ronald Reagan, let me take this guy Pollard out and shoot him on the front of the White House, or the White House lawn. That was the biggest treason. How did that guy Pollard get out and he's back in Israel now? That's crime. That should be in the news all the time. And another thing we're talking about this guy Moore. What about Bill Clinton when he has an illegitimate son? He don't even want to pay child or take the DNA test. Can you imagine what that would do to the Democratic Party if they found out that Clinton does have an illegitimate black son? And he did take a DNA, and he had to pay the kid no money, so Hillary don't want him to pay the kid no money. He wants all the money for Chelsea. In the meantime, Bill Clinton's got 5 little grandkids running around.
Yep.
It's unbelievable. The media are such corrupted criminals, creatures, they're cretins. It's unbelievable to me. And then all the while you want to hear about Trump and Russia. What do they want us to do? Russia's got more ICBM than anybody in the world. What do you want to pick a fight with Russia for? Are you nuts? Are you serious?
Well, I think...
Well, why would you want to pick a fight with the Russians? That would be insanity.
I think the real goal here is not necessarily an actual conflict with Russia and China, but to basically reestablish a Cold War in order to divide the world up, with the U.S. thinking that most of the nations will side with the U.S., although recent indications are more and more countries are pivoting toward Russia and China, and the U.S. could find itself very much isolated on our side of the planet during a new Cold War. But of course the danger with any Cold War is it could get hot at any moment. That certainly almost happened to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
That's right. Michael, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I heard today, she's 86 years old.
Yep.
You got a woman 86 years old on the Supreme Court? What is that? That's insanity. She's almost 90 years old.
Well,
they got her on the Supreme Court. She looks like she got dementia. She's 4'1"?
Well, her being a woman is not an issue. Her height is not an issue. But I agree, mental competency is. And she's hardly the only person that people are wondering if their brains are still working correctly. Nancy Pelosi, for one, Maxine Waters, they keep making these goofs during their speeches, and you kind of wonder, you know, are they missing a few marbles up there?
Right on. They're missing more than a couple of marbles, Michael, I can tell you. But, you know, it's just a great thing that Trump got this the 7-2 vote in the Supreme Court today for the travel ban, so we'll see what else happens. He got the tax bill passed through there. Now let's see what he does with this DACA. He needs not to pass DACA because DACA does not need to pass. We don't need, they might be their dream, but it's America's nightmare. We do not need that. We need to deport all these people back out of here. We need to get the 3.5 million or 4 million out of California. That Jerry Brown should be arrested for what he's doing with the sanctuary cities, Michael. And, you know, there's no way that should be a sanctuary state that gets federal laws. There's no way.
Well, again, from the Democrats' point of view, is they're trying to flood this country with illegal immigrants and refugees because with our current election system where voter ID is not required, they're counting on these illegals and refugees to vote the Democrats into the control of Congress next year. And again, I wish Donald Trump's Commission on Election Integrity would be living up to its name, but so far we're not hearing about anything coming from them. One other thought occurs to me, and that is if you are a pilot, you are required on a regular basis to recertify, to basically prove that you are still know how to fly a plane, that you're mentally capable of doing that. I think we ought to have the same thing for all our politicians. You know, every 6 months they're evaluated to see if they are starting to suffer from dementia, and if they are, as some of them certainly seem to indicate, then it's time to give them a nice retirement.
Bye-bye, McCain. Bye-bye, Corker.
Yep. All right, well, listen, Tom, we're going to let you go.
Thanks, sir.
And we're going to switch over to Sherry in Fredericksburg. Aloha, Sherry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, what's on my mind, Mike, is something you said about science, and you have to be careful. You made a good point on this. I had been thinking about something this week, that our ability to do what God can do is actually here in its infancy. And lasers in the future will heal. You can pray, intercessory prayer heals, but you can also create lasers that heal and create quantum connectedness. In fact, I was reading this the other day. I thought, oh, I've got to weave this into artificial intelligence knowledge here. Entangled photons are now relatively easy to create by shining a laser with energetic, short wavelength violet light into a nonlinear crystal.
Yes.
And this really, this Bell's theorem, that's Theorem, Bell's theorem, he came up with a mathematical proof that our space-time reality is non-local. So we're getting into scary stuff that some people, you know, playfully call ET technology. I enjoy calling it that. But it's here, and it'll get more so now. But there's a major difference between what artificial intelligence can produce and what God can do. And you kind of pointed to it here. Artificial intelligence can do the same thing God can do, but it can also turn that technology against us, whereby God, you can trust. The soul force in the universe that Gandhi talks about, I believe, as Episcopalian, is just a totally loving force. I don't believe in God being an evil, angry,
Sherry, let me cut in on you because
you can trust it.
I avoid discussions of religion for reasons we've already discussed.
I know.
But you are absolutely correct that we need to be concerned about this idea of AI systems now being able to create new, better AI systems. And
yes,
there's a very real possibility that we may be now engineering our successors here on Earth.
Well, the thing is, God can do it too. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, now this, you know, I'm not really looking at it as a religious thing. I'm just looking at if God's going to bring it into the world, it has to have an efficacy. You know, it has to have a way of proving itself. or it wouldn't be able to manifest in the world, because this is a different level of existence. And if it's going to manifest in the world, it's going to have a worldly way to create it, and it's also going to have a godly way to create it. As I see it, it's not just religion, it's just that the universe has this wonderful entanglement. It's the unique significance of quantum mechanics, entangled photons, and all that stuff.
Yeah, there's some good stuff in quantum mechanics.
Entanglement is unique.
Okay, Sherry.
So,
again, I want to get away from talking about. I want to talk. Get away from talking about God, but there are some amazing things out there, and I mean, if you look at the natural world, which you think was all created by God, there's a lot of mistakes in it. You know, nipples on men, duck-billed platypus.
There is.
And
but there's, in this world,
we do need to be very, very careful about those things that we're bringing into the world. We've already seen how GMO was botched up and has become a potential crisis for the human race. We've seen how the greed of the vaccine makers has resulted in putting out vaccines that are causing more harm than good, like that dengue vaccine they just tested down there in the Philippines. And now all of a sudden they're saying it's going to make the disease worse. Now, we do need to be careful with this idea of AIs creating other AIs, because inevitably they're going to progress to the point where they're going to be beyond the ability of human beings to understand. And that's when it's going to become very, very risky.
Well, I think it will be understandable. I don't know how much they're going to want us to understand it. My big warning here is don't let them, like I said before, don't let them call it God, because this soul force is also in the universe, and it works differently. It works the same, but it's something you can trust. I'm just going to leave it with that. There is a soul force in the universe, according to Gandhi, and I tend to kind of lean that way. That's me personally. You don't have to lean that way. But if it's just be careful if they start calling it God, because even though it can do some of the same things, maybe a laser can come in and heal something. It'll be very nice in the future. Cancer could be eradicated and everything. But
well, I think
just be careful.
You don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about, because all of our technology to date can modify and change the material that's already here, convert certain chemicals into other chemicals, and so forth and so on. So far, no human technology has ever been able to create matter or energy out of thin air, or to transform one to, well, yes, we can convert energy to matter, or matter to energy, that's what a nuclear bomb does. But the idea that we're building machines that would approach Godhead, no. Are we building machines that could eventually replace us as the dominant form of life on this planet? Absolutely. And it's a very real possibility. But again, in the desire for corporate profits, we're seeing corporations make very dangerous and reckless decisions. And I question this idea of having an AI able to create new and better AIs than itself. Because at some point you're going to evolve to something where it is truly self-aware and sentient. And we're going to find ourselves looking into our computer screens, and there's going to be something looking back. And that is going to be a crisis for the human race, I think. Anyway, we're going to let you go here. I'm running out of time, and I only got a few more stories to get into. Getting on back to vaccines, we talked about this a little bit before, but it's worth mentioning again, especially in light of the dengue vaccine disaster down in the Philippines. There was a study conducted by Thiel University and published in the Journal of Trace Elements in Medicine and Biology. And basically what they did is they found that the brains of autistic children have up to 10 times more aluminum in their brains than what is considered safe in adults. Now, the study notes that aluminum is crossing the blood-brain barrier and accumulating in cells involved in maintaining a constant internal environment such as temperatures. Now, according to the Centers for Disease Control, aluminum is present in U.S. childhood vaccines that prevent hepatitis A, hepatitis B, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, the Tdap, Haemophilus influenza type B, human papillomavirus, and pneumococcus infection. They're all carrying aluminum into your body, into your children's body. And the aluminum is added, according to the CDC, as an adjuvant, which is to increase the body's immune response to the vaccine. And this study seems to undermine any claims that aluminum in vaccines are safe, because these children, there was no other possible source for them to get intravenous aluminum, which could then get into their brains. And so this does need to be looked at. But again, there's big money involved, and nobody wants to put out information that would yield to civil rights laws, civil lawsuits, or even worse. Now, another system that was touted as being good for the country and turned out not to work is the gun registration background check system. Because apparently somebody did an inspection and found out that some 4,000 guns were sold to people. Even though the background check said they were clear, they actually had criminal records, mental health issues. So now the feds are trying to get these 4,000 guns back. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, we all know that civil forfeiture is a major, major problem. And there is an interesting case, though, that just happened down in Wyoming. Musician Phil Paramovich drove in Wyoming without his seatbelt buckled. Now, a click-it ticket in Wyoming usually runs about $25. In Phil's case, it cost him nearly $92,000 when the police just decided to confiscate everything because he was driving without a seatbelt. Horrible crime. I don't advise doing it, by the way. But apparently a judge hearing the case said, yeah, this was a little bit of overkill, and he's handed the $92,000 back to the musician, so that's a good thing. I remember when I was a kid, seatbelts weren't mandatory. In fact, my parents both engaged in a little auto racing, hill climb, rally, that kind of thing, and my father had seatbelts in his Triumph. And the social reaction around us was, oh, that just proves you're a reckless driver. Oh, you're a dangerous person. If you've got seatbelts, you must be a horribly reckless driver. And now, of course, it's completely different today. I mean, I can't get in the car. I feel uncomfortable if I don't have the belt on. Now, over in Atlanta, Fulton County, there was a little bit of an ugliness because apparently some activists were trying to provide the homeless with a Thanksgiving meal. And the police showed up and handed out tickets because the activists did not have a food distribution permit. Now, apparently, Fulton County does have a policy requiring organizers of such efforts to obtain a permit. But the problem is local authorities in the past have turned a blind eye to the ordinance. But according to the group, Food Not Bombs, that feed the homeless, last week that changed. And of all times, right before Thanksgiving, where you're supposed to give thanks and share. That really is the police state. I don't think you should need to have a food distribution license to simply give packaged food from the supermarket to the hungry and homeless. Now, for some reason, Democrats are calling for a ban on bulletproof glass in stores. They're claiming that it is offensive for stores to erect bulletproof glass to protect their workers. Who is it offensive to? The criminals? I don't really care about not offending criminals. I think if a store has the funds to put up bulletproof glass, it's a good thing to do, especially in places like Chicago and Baltimore. And speaking of Baltimore, you know that police officer who was shot with his own gun just days before he was going to testify against his fellow officers? The Baltimore Police Department first refused to allow the FBI to examine that case. Then when that became a stink, they turned around and said, yes, the FBI can investigate. But it looks like more dirty cops. Anyway, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here, get something useful done with the rest of the day. Please stay tuned for John Stadmiller. He's got a very interesting guest for you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everyone that you know. We are the new media, but I need your help to do it. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.